Okay, so where to start? Let's start somewhere. Let's put some of those questions. So, what's in a name? Let's say we're talking here about the difference between Judo and Jiu-Jitsu. The problem there is that people have this one-to-one concept. So, let's say now, and let's say past. People say that now we have kendo, and that was the equivalent of Judo, but with some reorganisation, some moral code overlay to make it Budo. We had Judo. That's the same as Jiu-Jitsu. These are equivalent, right? Judo, Jiu-Jitsu, same thing, but with some development, some overlay of moral code, and that this is how that things work. You know, there's now Naginata Do. And there used to be Naginata Jitsu, and everything happens in this little box, and these are totally separate ideas, separate skills. We practice this separately now. It used to be compartmentalised in the past. That doesn't really make any sense. These things obviously specialise in something. This breakup isn't really that useful. There is not this one-to-one relationship between Jiu-Jitsu and Judo. Jiu-Jitsu is an empty-handed art. It's purely that. It's just fighting with empty hands, and it's the same as that, except, well, technically it's a little bit different, and, well, we have more moral code and competition or whatever over that. That's not a good way to think about it, that type of segregation. So, what are we talking about here with Ju-Jitsu? You know, how far do we go? What is the difference between that and Ju-Jitsu? And Ju-Jitsu. Well, that's the same word. These are the same character. This is the way that theoretically it should be written. In the past, these were very commonly used, and they make a little bit more sense because if you have to say, how do I pronounce that word? Jiu-Jitsu or Ju-Jitsu, that's how it's pronounced, but the standard has become, this is how those characters should be written. In some ways this is quite handy because for the most part, this has now become what people think of as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So, what people commonly term now as ground fighting. That term has become synonymous with that. There is still places in the world where this term also sort of means another type of Jiu-Jitsu where we're standing up or trying to hit each other or whatever it is. It's carried over from its past use. in the 20th century, especially the early 20th century, this was a pretty typical way of writing it, and you don't see that all that much until a bit later, but that's the right way to do it. Theoretically. It's quite handy, really, and it'll be even more handy if things change in the future, that Jiu-Jitsu or Jiu-Jitsu equals BJJ, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. That's handy because if somebody advertises that they do Jiu-Jitsu or Ju-Jitsu, even now people will say, well, that doesn't equal those things, which is handy. If you're sort of falling into a category that's outside of that, it might be handy in the future if it sort of becomes standardised, and if you're talking about that, you're saying that, well, that equals maybe Korean, and this equals some sort of Gendo Budo or something that was created after the Meiji Restoration. Excuse my writing. 1868. So maybe people in the future would sort of say, often, and the quality here varies of course, often this is a self-defense type, broad, close quarters combat activity, let's say. Obviously there's huge variation in that, and maybe this makes more sense to say, well, I'm doing Kyoryu. However, okay, what do we do? What we do, it's been around 100 years, but it still fits into this category. If you want me to write it, when I write the name of the school, I use that because that's the right way to write it. But if I'm advertising what I do, would it make more sense to use that? Maybe. Who cares? So, what we don't want to do is say Judo is equivalent to Jiu-Jitsu. I'll use this one from now on, doesn't matter. Why is that? Well, that one-to-one relationship, okay, does not exist. There is basically no limit. Okay? Even if you go back to pre-Meiji Restoration and you look at Kyoryu, often a Jiu-Jitsu school would include Genjutsu, Genjitsu, some arresting, depending on where it's from, some small weapons. They typically have a whole range. There's no real equivalent. Just because it's that doesn't tell you what's in it. But it doesn't exclude Genjutsu, doesn't exclude the Naginata or something, doesn't exclude anything. One of the big problems here is to say, because of this one-to-one relationship, that this equals unarmed. If you make this association, you're on the wrong track. Why? Okay. Let's go pre-1868. So we have samurai of varying states of how much of a warrior is a normal samurai. Depends basically between there and say 1300. There's a great deal of variation between how much war and how much fighting and how much training and how important that training is going on. In this bucket, what are the chances at least the opponent is unarmed? 0. Absolutely 0. This samurai is a tad of a romantic term sometimes, but let's go with it. You're a samurai. What's the chance that you're going around unarmed? You're a professional warrior in feudal Japan. 0. The people that you encounter, be they an angry peasant or someone else, what is the chance that they think you're going to be unarmed? 0. What is the chance that they are carrying a weapon of some kind? Right? Pretty much 100%. Right? So where does unarmed come in? Well, it comes from this. Okay? This false equivalency. Okay. Let's go between 1868 and 1945, into the Second World War. Let's say I am using my Jiu-Jitsu in a professional capacity. Maybe I'm a policeman, maybe I'm just a citizen, maybe I'm in the armed forces, maybe I've been deployed overseas overtly or covertly. If I'm a policeman and I've got to arrest a ruffian, if I'm a citizen and I'm going to be attacked, what are the chances that that person is unarmed? Pretty much 0. Maybe I can get the drop on him. Maybe he's asleep, right? The rest of the time, pretty much 0. Let's go now from 1945 to today. I'm a policeman, I'm a citizen, I'm in the army, I'm overseas overtly or covertly. What are the chances that the person that I'm going to encounter, that I'm going to have to engage with in those capacities is armed? I'm going to say very high. So in all of these things, this idea that this is unarmed, right, is totally wrong, and totally misleading, and it becomes from this idea of this equivalent of Judo Jiu-Jitsu, Kendo Kenjutsu, Naga-no-no-no. Okay. So, why does that matter? And why is that relevant now to self-defense, or this is your job? Jiu-Jitsu. Practical. Okay. What's the reasons now for this, besides interest? Well, one, it's your job. Two, okay, self-defense. Or defensive tactics, to be more precise. Maybe pure interest. What is the point of judo? Well, unfortunately, I'm going to go mainly sport. Still currently Olympic. Okay. As a base for other sports. Base for grappling. Interest, that's the same. Why would you do any sport? Its pure idea is not your job or self-defense. It may have components that are useful to these things. But really, why am I doing judo now? I do it for the sport of it, for the love of grappling, for the exercise, for the fun. On the list of things, really, the idea of it being a martial art is a fair bit down the list. Whereas if you're training this practically, the idea of being a martial art should be high on the list. The problem with this term is it's such a broad term, it's come to mean pretty much anything. So it's almost a useless term. Okay, so over here, and this kind of goes for combat sports. One opponent, no weapons, fixed location, no environmental hazards, know exactly what you're wearing as a referee. All of these things aren't covering into these categories very well, are they? However, in terms of self-defense, or it's your job, what does this have? Good basics, resistance. So these are specializations. If you want to grapple on the ground, the best way to practice grappling on the ground is going to be BJJ. Now, how well that translates to self-defense, yes, it might depend on exactly who you're doing it with, etc., etc. But the building blocks here are much stronger because it's a specialisation, and you can go for a huge amount of resistance in the training. Some of the things that you do up here, you just cannot implement that kind of resistance You just cannot repeatedly punch someone in the face while they're on the ground. Like, okay, you can at MMA, but you can't turn up and train like that. You can't get something that's a hard object and stab the shit out of somebody and then call that training. So there's always a modification here, but you can work within a rule set here where you don't need to make a lot of those modifications. People still can't, just go buck wild. They need to keep it within some realm of control, but that's much increased from this kind of training. And if you want to build up your skill set here, you want to do some of this and take it over. So, that's all very well, but this one-to-one relationship is very problematic if you think about it from the point of this is your job, or this is your defensive tactics. Let's go here, practical Jiu-Jitsu. Okay. And let's go here, most martial arts. Okay. And this is where when people use terms like knife defense, it becomes a red flag. Let's go here, knife. Most martial arts. Default. Default is no. They do not have a knife. Proceed in this fashion. If knife, becomes apparent they have a knife, then I change tack and do something else. This could be a knife / any weapon. Practical Jiu-Jitsu. Default, two sweetest words in the English language. Yes. Proceed in this fashion. If no, doesn't matter, keep going. So, as we see this as armed, at least the opponent, the default is yes, they're probably armed. Now, here, they have a knife or weapon. One of the very common things in knife attacks is concealment. Close range. Grab and stab. And what people say all the time, didn't even know he had a knife, didn't know, thought I was being hit. I know a few people have been stabbed, they all have said that. That's so common. So, our knife, it's concealed, it comes out at very close range, you grabbed on and you stabbed, you don't even know that he's got it. Therefore, if I'm going to take this, the default no, and what I really need to do is be on this track for something else, default no, this is problematic. Right? Suboptimal, let's call it that. Because I have to recognise that he has a knife and then do something else. And all of these factors are working against me to recognise that. And then my something else is only a low percentage of my training. All of my default wants me to keep going in this direction. Right? Here our default is yes, so we take a tactical and a strategic approach that fits in with that. So we don't have to change any way here. So we're trying to at least head to where we want to be. Okay. If my default here is yes and this is no, it might be that I can do something else. If it becomes very apparent to me that there's no weapon involved, he's only attacking me with hands, more possibilities open up. But if this is no, that doesn't mean something else can't be reduced. So this plan is problematic if this is your job or if you want to use this for defensive tactics. That's obvious from this pattern. And what I'm doing here all the time is adapting to the fact there's a knife. That's not my normal thing, but I'm going to have to adapt to it. This here is really what people call knife defense. And that's why this is a red flag when people talk about this. Because it tells me, for the most part, that this is my default. No, if not, I start doing knife defense. There is no reason then, if this is so good and it works against these weapons, why wouldn't I do that to start with? I start with something worse because I enjoy it. And then I get onto something that works in these situations, in the tough spots, I change to that. Why wouldn't I just do that? So, if we therefore have, I like this diagram, I'm going to leave it for a second. If we therefore have here's all of martial arts possibility. Okay? Here's what works against a knife or a weapon. Okay. Does the stuff that works against a knife or a weapon work against someone who's unarmed? Yes. Is it the best approach for a kickboxing fight? No. Is it the best approach for a fight that's taking outside of a controlled environment? Quite possibly, because I don't know if a weapon's going to be produced even if one is there. If this is all possibility and this is what works with a knife, well, why don't I start with that? But I do start with that. That's the whole point here of practical jiu-jitsu. That's where I start. If I'm doing kickboxing, I might start here. Great for kickboxing. Suboptimal if we're working in this sphere. I'm going to start with that, then I'm going to move on to other things. Maybe I'm interested in kenjutsu, okay? Maybe I'm interested in pure grappling. I'm going to start here and I'm going to branch out in that fashion. I don't want to start here, have my basics here, and then half of my basics. This is the part of my basics that are actually useful. All of this here, all these basics, these things that I've drilled, problematic. And I'm going to have to find that in the middle of a realistic situation. I want to do that in training. Okay, we want to do that in training. So that's why we're always working with the knife, and that's why we're taking our setups all the time and proceeding in a fashion as if the person is armed, because if he's not armed, that's not a problem at all. But if I'm starting here and he is armed, I've got to make a 90-degree turn here about what I'm doing and start doing what we only do once a month. Once a month is knife defense. Friday nights, last day of the month. That's why when we do knives, we do knives every lesson. Okay. So, what does all that mean? What are we trying to do? Bloody hell. Brain damage is setting in. Yeah. We're trying to do practical Jiu-Jitsu, however you write that. Okay. It's not unarmed. Default. Other person is armed. We're looking at this as it's our job, or self-defense, defensive tactics. The fact that you enjoy it is a bonus. Right? It's a good thing. It's why you keep coming. It's not the raison d'etre for doing it.